Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Electric Pyramid. This is hour 2 of our discussions with Byron DeLear, a man who I really just like to listen to. He's an eloquent speaker, and we are talking tonight about some perhaps somewhat lesser known aspects of the beginning of the American Revolution. And Byron, what I'm kind of taking away from this, when you talk about these red and white stripes and what you were getting to right before we went to the break, if I'm feeling you correctly on this, what you're kind of saying is that this Grand Union flag and these red and white stripes that Washington and the country decided to use is in some way embracing the legacy of the merchant, the legacy of the business person, the legacy of trade.
Absolutely. And
right on.
And it's key. It's free trade, and it's which kind of harkens back to the notion of a free Mason.
Yes.
And the Masons were building castles and forts as operative Masons. These are the guys that are actually laying the foundation stones of the aircraft carriers of their day, if you will. I mean, if you could build a fortification and put it in theater, that was how you controlled an area. And so these guys had a technology that was the currency of power. And they banded together, they unionized. In fact, to go back to something that we were introducing before the break, the Hanseatic League, the word Hansa means union or guild. And so the idea is to band your political power together and then go out in the world and act. A symbolic representation of that would be the fasces, which is the Roman symbol of power, which sees a bundle of sticks that are gathered together by a leather thong around an axe. And that represents the coherence of your political efforts. And if you look at the House of Representatives today, on either side of the dais are two massive fasces, the symbol of power and the symbol of political cohesion. Interestingly, the word fasces morphed into a different concept, which reared its ugly head in the 20th century, and that's fascism.
Yes.
Which was the unification of corporate power and state power, et cetera, and that was, of course, diabolical and nefarious in the end. But this idea that the political coherence needs to be present in order to save revolutions from going amok.
Yes.
And the French Revolution did not have that political coherence, and it was infected with a lot of anarchy, and blood ran from the guillotine, and you didn't have anybody to stop it. And then you saw the rise of Napoleon after the French Revolution. But in the United States, the aristocratic class, these founders, these men of enlightenment, these Freemasons, they understood that within the confines of the lodge, where the business of the craft is conducted, everybody is to deal with each other as equals. That's dealing on the level with one another. And so the idea of chaotic anarchy was anathema to a brother of the craft. And there were many times in the early years when Washington had to come back to the service of his country to keep things from falling apart.
Well, I wanted to ask you something. I want to jump back just a little bit. Robert Morris, this man who was so successful and could have gone many different ways. He was certainly a man of wealth and a man of influence. He did not have to do what he did, but he had the vision to do so and to aid a young United States and to lend some of his ships and to lend us money and to float our economy. And yet he eventually was somewhat vilified and thrown into debtor's prison. Is that correct?
It's a complex character. Robert Morris opposed independence.
Really?
Can you believe it? Here's a guy that's using every art of subterfuge to get bullets and bombs and weapons to destroy the king's troops. And yet, in the debates in Congress, he was alongside John Dickinson, who opposed independence and thought it was too rash. But the reason why Morris opposed independence, in my mind, is because 2 years earlier, he was doing business with Sir Francis Baring. Sure. These well-established business interests in England, and he couldn't do it. It would be like putting a smudge on their face. Most of the people that opposed independence in the early Congress were given their hat and asked to leave the room. They didn't ask Robert Morris to leave the room. They asked him to stay. They reelected him, and he wound up signing the Declaration of Independence. So this is a complex situation.
Do you think he did that under duress, or did he mean it by the time?
I think that he had mixed feelings. On one hand, he didn't want to communicate to his substantive business interests overseas that he was against them. And on the other hand, he saw this as a great opportunity.
Absolutely.
John Adams kind of comments on Morris that his mind is toward commerce, although he's extremely capable administrator, et cetera, et cetera. He was a businessman, and all the deals that were conducted by the secret committees of Congress to access all this war material, they were all done in secret, and Robert Morris got a piece of every transaction. And he came out of the Revolution as clearly the richest man in America, so much so that in the decades following, he owned an astounding 6 million acres in America, with other business interests and deals. And with the rise of Napoleon in Europe, the global economy crashed, and his whole investment schemes went into the crapper, and he was thrown in debtor's prison in the 1790s. And that's why history has largely forgotten his contribution, and kind of a schoolboy popular history, they look at Alexander Hamilton as perhaps being a pivotal architect of the American economy, and yet he based all his work on Robert Morris's designs for the American economy as the architect of this free market.
But he had not been labeled a war racketeer.
He was accused by Thomas Paine of being Morris was accused by Thomas Paine of being a war profiteer, and he was exonerated. That was in 1779. This was before the Revolution was won. These guys had skin in the game, and certainly what I've learned in politics is you can't get people to move unless they have skin in the game. But fast forward to today, and we have this movement going around the country right now called the Article 5 Convention Movement. And this is a time capsule gift from the founders, from the Constitution. Article 5 allows... Yes.
Byron, before we go forward with that, because I do want to get into that heavily, I want to let people know how they can get to you and find out more about you. We are speaking with Byron DeLear. He has a brand new website up. It's ByronDeLear.com. His last name is spelled DELEAR. So it's ByronDeLear.com. And I believe we can put that in the chat room as well. He's got a brand new website that just, I believe, went live today. You can find out more about Byron. You can find out about the work that we've been talking today on the Grand Union flag. You can also find out about a novel that he has coming out as well. So I just want to let you guys know how you can get to Byron. You can contact him through the website, find his Facebook page, etc. right there. So it's ByronDeLear.com. I just want to make sure people knew about that. Byron, continue with Article 5, because I did want to speak about that today.
Yes. On the author website that I put up today in commemoration of your 10th show, Michael, We have there's a novel that I've been working on for about 4 or 5 years called Grand Union, and it's the first in a trilogy. It's a thriller. It's a mystery. It takes place in the modern day. It deals with esoterica and cyber tech, and there's also some moments where we revisit the flag raising at Prospect Hill and some of the stuff that I've been discussing about the Hanseatic League.
The cover's fantastic, by the way.
Oh, yeah, thanks. There's some deep symbolism embedded there. It all centers around this 8-pointed star of Ishtar, which is an ancient Sumerian symbol. In fact, it's called the Dingir, which was the first jot and tittle for God. And so when you look at the Union flag, you see St. George's Cross and St. Andrew's Cross that makes this 8-pointed star. That is an ancient archetypal symbol that is the first word for deity that we have record of. And this is going back thousands and thousands of years. And so I believe that symbols have their own DNA, if you will, and they move forward, they cascade forward through the timeline like memes. And so it's certainly before the Christian era, and it's an important symbol. And on the cover there, you see these atomic forces springing forth out of the Star of Ishtar, and I'm kind of alluding to the Gnostic idea, probably out of the canonical Gospels in the Bible, the one Gospel that has the most enlightenment or knowledge-based spirituality would be the Gospel of John, which opens up, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word essentially encapsulates this motivation for creation. It's a desire to have a conversation. And so the unity expression of the cosmos being one thing, one expression of creation. Let there be light. You had darkness, and then and what sprang forth was the entire universe. And essentially, it's creating a conversation between creator and created. And so we're all a part of that cosmos. We're all a sliver of that collective consciousness that Jung talks about. And if you do some research into quantum physics and some of the cutting edge philosophical aspects of some of these discoveries, you have really sincere mainstream scientists that indicate that the entire cosmos is essentially one mind with a capital M. It's one consciousness. It's one being. And so it's that togetherness that I think shines a light on a decent future for humanity. And we have to get past these warring nations, and we have to look at one tribe of humanity, one garden, one planet, one existence. And this is when we're going to stop the escalating war that we've been engaged against the environment. And that is why I run a clean energy program in St. Louis, Missouri, to attempt to promote clean energy and promote environmental stewardship, because humanity cannot war with the garden that birthed us. And Amen. We have to arrive at a harmonious relationship with the environment that sustains human civilization, or there will be great trauma and travail in the coming decades. I don't mean to get so expansive here topic-wise, but
I like it.
But back to the Article 5 convention. About 2004, I was hosting a show called the Global Peace Network, and I just returned from the Holy Land from forming a non-governmental organization called Global Peace Solution, and I became the North American representative for this peace initiative between Israelis and Palestinians called MIFCOD, or People's Voice, that garnered about 500,000 signatories in a region of 6 million. That's a significant percentage of Palestinians and Israelis that were supporting a two-state solution. And of course, with recent events in Gaza, it's a continuing conflict, and it's seemingly intractable. And I blame the leadership for not not taking care of people, not providing safety for children, essentially. Something, the most basic human need is safety. But I had founded this non-governmental organization, and I was hosting a show, and it was broadcast out of Southern California on one of the Iranian networks. And it was broadcast on XTV, which is related to another station called Pars TV. If you remember, in the 2009 Green Revolution in Iran, on CNN, they would take camera crews and they would go into some of these stations in Southern California that were broadcasting on satellites in the Middle East. And back in 2004, I had done my show for a little bit, close to a year. And I had all sorts of peacemakers and humanitarians and altruists and academicians and activists on my show that were promoting this really expansive view of human dignity and human rights. And that was all being pumped in the Middle East. And so when that Green Revolution happened and you had these proponents of democracy and these students coming out and protesting against the theocratic regime in Iran, I kind of felt like I was slightly, had a part in that, because I'd been promoting these ideas of self-determination and democracy alongside demonizing George Bush and his adventurism in Iraq.
Right.
But the Global Peace Network was a great experience, and I had ran into this gentleman named John de Herrera, who had a website called CC2, which was Constitutional Convention 2. And he was promoting this idea that America needed to come together and make a constitutional convention so that we could actually change the source code of our operating system, which is the Constitution. And Article 5 is this one paragraph in the middle of the Constitution that says that the state legislatures can petition for a convention, and we will assemble a convention that generates a roster of ideas, and then those ideas will go back to the states for ratification, and we can actually change the Constitution outside of Washington.
Which is huge.
I mean, and this is something that's totally legitimate. It's right in the Constitution. Interestingly, the right wing, the conservative side of our political spectrum today, in many cases libertarians, have gotten a lot of traction about Article 5 because I think that their animus is hatred of Barack Obama. But at this time, when I got involved in the Article 5 convention movement, we saw George Bush engaging in all sorts of unconstitutional activities and
activities,
getting us in wars that obviously history now sees as some of the worst foreign policy ever conducted by our country in perhaps 100 years.
I agree.
I mean, it's absolute mess in Iraq of the millions.
Byron,
yes.
The first time I interviewed you, here again, this is an idea you turned me on to that I had never heard of. And this was 2007, 2008. I don't remember exactly, but we had this discussion because I was outraged by the Bush administration and the activities that had taken place post 9/11. And you brought up this Article 5 convention, and I had never heard of it. And I believe that to this day, this is still something that not a lot of people know about.
Excuse me, it's an amazing initiative that was designed into our Constitution to prevent top-down malfeasance. I mean, we've seen a lot of top-down correction in our history. Like, for example, getting students entry into schools in the South during the civil rights. You had the National Guard and you had the Kennedys pressing in to offer top-down correction to states that were off the mark, so to speak, off of American principles. Well, I don't need to make the argument that Washington is off the mark, and it's a bipartisan affliction. And you have
agreed.
You have ungodly spending going on with no effort to say, hey, we got to raise taxes to pay for what we want. And so now we have hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year that just is interest on our debt. And it's just unconscionable. It'd be like buying a house with your credit card. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so that's a lot of waste. But the Article 5 convention, what was interesting to me was that there were 700 applications from 49 states to trigger the convention in the history of our country that had been sent to the halls of Congress, and yet Congress has failed to even count the applications. It's as if they ignore that Article 5 even exists. And
Byron,
so, yes.
Byron, when these applications come in, okay, 700 plus, that is hugely significant. That who is collecting these applications, or who is ignoring them? And it sounds to me that's illegal.
It is illegal. And yet the Supreme Court refuses to act on it because of the separation of powers. They don't want to tell Congress to do their job. And yet when you look at the language, it's so absolutely clear that Congress is essentially sitting on their hands and, with pretending that these applications don't exist, because all you need to trigger the convention is 2/3 of the states, 34 currently. And you have 700 of them. These are legislative acts. They don't time out when the state legislature closes doors and opens up another session. These are legislative acts that have lives of their own. They exist in perpetuity, and yet Congress has refused to count them. And I became a co-founder of an organization called Friends of the Article 5 Convention, FOAVC.org. And we were the first organization to really sponsor a forensic audit of the congressional record. In other words, the Congressional Research Service, or the guys that are in charge of the parliamentarian order in Congress, never counted these things. It took a citizens group to pay for a bunch of researchers to go in there. And so we took pictures of all these applications, and they're up on FOAVC.org website. You can see all these applications in black and white. And it's the kind of thing that it's like a reset button. It's like your computer is locked up and you can hit the reset button. You can reboot the computer. And there are a ton of issues that Congress is either unwilling or unable to visit. And that's what the convention was designed for. And when you hear the commentary of the founders as they were debating Article 5 in the minutes for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, they say very clearly that if the federal government ever gets out of control, well, we have this mechanism that we can engage to bring it back in line. And that's why it was designed. And so perhaps some of the nightmare of tyranny and dysfunction in Washington springs forth from the fact that we haven't utilized this fundamental right for American citizens, which is the Article 5 Convention.
So when you guys found and quantified these 700 plus applications, what did Congress say to this? I mean, what was their explanation for how they've just been able to completely ignore the fact that these things ever happened?
Well, there's been quite a lot of activity that's moved this argument forward. And like I mentioned, on the right side of the aisle, in effort to shut down the Obama administration, you're seeing a lot of activity. There's this Mount Vernon Assembly, and a group of state legislators have gathered, and they're trying to craft what the convention would look like. They're trying to do the rules for the convention. But back to in the Bush days, there was a gentleman named Bill Walker who wound up suing the Supreme Court and suing all members of Congress for dereliction of duty and refusing to abide by their oath of office, which is a federal offense. In other words, their oath of office says, I will support and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and yet they're ignoring the heart of the Constitution. And so Bill Walker sued Congress. It went to the Supreme Court, and it was denied certiorari. They only see about 3 or 4% of the cases that hit their doorstep, and so it kind of went into limbo again. There's a gentleman named Dan Marks who lives in Hawaii that has a website, article5.org, and he's been doing real yeoman's work in promoting these efforts. But a big moment happened in 2012 when the Congressional Research Service, which is the think tank of Congress, if you will, they work for Congress and they do research for Congress. They released 2 white papers on the Article 5 Convention, one dealing with the history and one concerned with current applications for the Article 5 movements. And our organization, Friends of the Article 5 Convention, was cited in these Congressional Research Service reports saying that we were the only group that had counted the applications. And it's shocking that Congress is not tabulating these applications. And they pretty much say that this is an ongoing constitutional crisis, that if it ever enters the popular imagination to the degree that would scare political actors, we would have our convention. We would have our assembly of citizens, and you can't be an elected politician and sent to the convention. You have to be a delegate, a citizen, and it's a conversation. You discuss ideas, you discuss solutions, and it would be covered by C-SPAN. It would be the most amazing thing. It would be the first Article 5 convention in the history of our country, and everybody would get a constitutional civics lesson. And even if nothing came out of it, the intrinsic value, the civic value of engaging in that convention and seeing this tool emerge that was designed by the founders as a time capsule gift, essentially, would be a great thing for our country.
Agreed. Explain to me exactly how this would work. You said that this would take approximately 34 states, and how would each state have to file an application with the same language? How would this work exactly?
There's a couple different opinions about that. Our group believes that these applications are legislative acts that are still standing, and that the convention should be called immediately, and that Congress is engaged in cynical dereliction of duty in not calling the convention. There is a group that is promoting the idea that the states need to reissue applications that have similar language, and so they're busily getting a couple of the southern states and some of the states that are.
But you said these applications do not time out.
They don't. I don't think they time out. It's my opinion that they don't time out.
Okay.
In fact, the 27th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was one of the first Bill of Rights amendments, and it was discovered by a law clerk like in the 70s or 80s or something like this, and then it became the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. So here's this amendment that hadn't accumulated the necessary ratifications. There were actually 12 bills, 12 amendments that were offered in the original Bill of Rights. Only 10 made it. And this particular amendment, the 27th Amendment to the Constitution currently, says that Congress can't give themselves a monetary raise in the same session that they're serving. It's a real no-brainer. It would be politically compromising to oppose this amendment. And so it gained new life, and it became the law of the land. And so that's an example that perhaps would indicate precedent that that point to the fact that any applications sent from the state legislature, because the language in Article 5 says that whenever 2/3 of the states apply, Congress shall call a convention. And that language is very explicit. Congress shall call a convention. In fact, Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 85 says that this language is peremptory, meaning it is without debate. Congress has no judicial power to table it or to conference it or whatever. They shall call a convention. In essence, in the Constitution, it says there shall be an executive branch. There shall be a Congress.
But they have not called a convention.
They have not called a convention. If people became aware of this, we would have our convention, and we would have a rebirth of civic involvement in the actual source code of our democracy.
I can't think of a better time than now.
Absolutely. And, we've on the left side, the progressive side, we've had some pretty substantive conversations with the Article 5 activists on the right side. And they're afraid of the progressives having a voice in the convention. And so oftentimes our encouragement that we band together as the left Article 5. I made a call to arms, if you will, saying that we have to band together, that the left side
Agreed.
of the Article 5 activists need to band together with the right side of the Article activists. We can't be afraid of each other. We have to have this conversation. There is great value in fiscal conservatism.
Absolutely.
The Republican Party that's been dominated by the Tea Party today is just going out the world backwards. I mean, they are so extreme in their policies that they're not interested in any government. You know, they want to drown it in a bathtub, right? Grover Norquist says he wants to drown government in a bathtub. They have no desire to have a operating government. They just want to shut it down and make it as infinitesimal as possible. And it's sad that the moderate country club Republicans, if you will, are not, that their voice has been shut out.
But it seems to me like the moderates are scared of the Tea Party. I mean, because when you say that the Republican Party's kind of been taken over by the Tea Party, I don't know that I see that. I mean, it seems to me more like they're scared of them and they're both somewhat paralyzing each other.
It's definitely a conflict that's ongoing. And, you know, you see like Cantor get ejected from office, and you know there's different reasons why that happened, but you know, it'll be an interesting presidential election in 2016.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think Hillary Clinton's going to be our next president. Wow.
Well, I would say the smart money would probably agree with you. Who do you think runs against her? Not Jeb Bush.
No, it's you know, you've got Jeb Bush and you got Chris Christie, and then you got the Tea Party faves, you know, Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, you know, who shockingly the other day on 60 Minutes said, you know, I don't really believe in the science of global warming. I mean, it's just
Rubio said that.
Yeah, I mean, he was. I forget the explicit statement that he made, but. You know, I think that his conservative bona fides were somewhat brought into question because he was supporting immigration reform, being a Latino heritage. Right. So he's attempting to sort of rehabilitate his credentials in carrying the flag for the science deniers, which is just shocking. I mean, he doesn't have any problem believing in the science of the Boeing jets that he gets on when he travels to and fro. He doesn't have any problem believing in the science when he types in, you know, some text message or replies to a Twitter or this kind of a thing. You know, and of course, electronics use quantum physics to operate the transistors and
right. I have to say, when it comes to climate change, global warming, it's complex because I have friends on both sides of this issue. And I have to say for myself, I do not question for a moment that climate change is happening. When man pollutes its planet, and as you say, we have to take responsibility for our stewardship of the planet, I have zero question about that. It's unfortunate that this has become such a divisive issue on both sides. And because I have friends who are scientists who don't buy it. And then I have friends who are on one side or the other for political gain. And I've got to be honest, I'm not completely sold on either side yet.
Yeah. I'm sold on it. And when you talk to NASA scientists who actually capture the carbon in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, and they identify that carbon as having originated in fossil fuel burning, it starts to become pretty clear. I mean, if you watch any time-lapse photography of any particular urban landscape and you see the cars moving like blood in a vein, you know, in time-lapse photography, just millions and millions of motor vehicles spewing this gaseous magnifying glass up into the atmosphere. I mean, think of all the urban areas on our planet, and this is replicated every single day. You have these vehicles traveling, and you know, the industrialized farming, the fact that our population was 1 billion in 1800, now it's 7 billion. Right. Because of agricultural revolution and the ability to feed these folks. And it's chemistry. And when you put greenhouse gas into the atmosphere, it magnifies the sun. It's like it's chemistry. It's not too hard to really understand, but if you're coming from a kind of a fundamentalist religious perspective that says that the inerrancy of the Bible is what we should follow, that the end days, the eschatological implications of fundamentalism would dictate that man is supposed to trounce the environment and to have dominion over the environment. And it promotes this idea that we're separate from the environment and that we're not part of the ecosystem that we're living in. And you have this mass extinction occurring right now. And there's a study that just came out recently calling it the sixth extinction.
Right.
This is a spiritual catastrophe that we are allowing tens of thousands, if not more, of species to die because of the exponential expansion of every aspect of the human enterprise. Fisheries are dying. Water is becoming polluted. You have dead zones in the ocean. The soil, the water, forests are being burned out. Just so that we can drive through Burger King to get our Big Mac. You've got beef being raised in Brazil as they use a scorched earth policy to destroy the Amazon. It's a huge bit of business, and to say that it doesn't impact the garden we live in is to be an ostrich sticking your head in the sand. I
agree with you on that. I guess my point is, I have just become so skeptical of so many things. Listen, I grew up in the oil business, and one of the things that I'm skeptical of is the fact that we're running out of oil. I believe in abiotic sources of oil, along with typical organic forms of oil. So I hear so many things on so many different sides. Sometimes I don't know who to believe anymore. And certainly I am not for an all-out assault on the planet by just doing whatever we want, whenever we want. I also think that there are aspects within our solar system that are out of our control that have to do with the sun. Now, and here again, listen, I'm not saying that we have some God-given right to just trash the planet. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just trying to keep an open mind. And I also do not poo-poo your efforts in any way.
No, I feel your sense of conflict there, Michael, and I encourage you to keep an open mind, and we all have to keep an open mind, and we can't submit to dogma. But fossil fuels are essentially really dirty because
I agree.
You're taking these carbon atoms, this, as Tom Hartman says, ancient sunlight. It's the storage of ancient sunlight because you have these plant materials and animal materials from millions of years ago that grew up because of the sun. They sequestered this carbon into their biological framework, and then now that biological framework is buried in the ground. It's essentially a product of the sun that we're excavating and then burning, and so it's creating this exponential rise in carbon. And the work that I do in energy efficiency and renewable energy and clean energy, this is more commensurate to the way a natural ecosystem operates, which is using the sun's energy in real time. And with efficiencies in electronics and efficiencies in motor transportation, we can power our entire civilization on renewables and clean energy and energy efficiency. I mean, it's the technology's there. There's legacy political forces within the fossil fuel industry that protect its turf.
Agreed.
And do not want change. My family's background was in Houston oil. So
I did not know that.
Yeah. So the Walker family down in Houston.
Okay.
The real Texas Ranger.
Yep.
So I can relate to what you're saying. There's been several movements in the last decade that talk about us running out of oil and peak oil. And there was a gentleman named Julian Darby that I shared a stage with at the World Peace Forum in Vancouver. And he was part of the Post-Carbon Institute, and they're talking about peak oil. And we have the technology to continue to excavate natural gas and oil, and there are new sources of oil. I don't know if there's like an organic biological force that generates oil in the bowels of the earth.
That was an idea by a Russian scientist about 100 years ago, and I actually kind of buy it. Now, that being said, one of the things that I have a huge problem with right now is fracking technology. Sure. And so I guess all I'm trying to say is I hear you, and I hear people on both sides, and it is a huge quandary. And I commend your efforts, which are reasonable and efficient and economically viable. It's funny.
Well, energy efficiency is the cheapest energy source out there. The payback is 4 or 5 to 1. Every dollar you put into energy efficiency, you get $4 or $5 of value coming back to you. So, and even LEED Platinum buildings. I did a sustainability consultation at the Clinton Presidential Center and Library down in Little Rock, Arkansas. And this is a LEED Platinum building from a decade ago. And the multidisciplinary team that was assembled put together a plan that would entertain another 60 or 70% energy savings on this massive complex that was already an A-plus complex, ostensibly, LEED Platinum. And so these technologies are moving forward. They're evolving at a quick pace. And we need to deploy them, and we need to embrace modernity. This is the real core ethos of progressivism, is that our field of knowledge is evolving, and we're becoming more capable, and we're becoming kinder and gentler. Even in the midst of all this warfare that's occurring across the planet in Ukraine and Syria and Israel, and even considering the carnage of the 20th century, the 200 million dead. If you listen to Steven Pinker, pivotal essay, The History of Violence, he talks about you are less likely as a human being to die due to violence at the hand of another human being today than you were yesterday. And tomorrow you will be even less likelier.
Right.
And so we are evolving. We are becoming, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, a common form of entertainment was to tie a cat's tail to a rope and light it on fire. And see this animal carbonized. Yeah. And that made people laugh. That doesn't exist in the Western world anymore. It's grotesque, anathema, macabre. It would never be done. And so we are evolving as a species. And of course, but like I said at the beginning of the show, I am an optimist.
Well, Byron, I agree with you. And especially on a one-to-one basis, I absolutely believe that. It is just the infrastructure that sometimes throws the wrench in the machine, because I have no doubt that single human beings left to their own devices will seek good. Yes, there's going to be the occasional psychopath or the occasional bad person, but by and large, I do believe in the majority of human beings being good. It's just that sometimes the mechanics of the infrastructure that we have to deal with are so embedded and so indebted to the process that they have become a part of, that they don't want to change. They don't want things to become any different and to progress and to change the machine. Somebody's got to take that risk. And a lot of times when you take the risk, you get your head lopped off. So I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying that I understand why change occurs so slowly. But as a human animal, yes, I agree with you.
And your show is one of the venues where we can have these kind of conversations that are expansive and that bring in the far corners of science and technology and history. And you start to articulate a very specific trajectory through discussing all these issues. And, the fact that a subsistence farmer in Sierra Leone can access his smartphone and get a weather report to facilitate his farming and have access to the sum of all human knowledge is just an incredible aspect of a real almost hive consciousness, a collective consciousness that's occurring. I mean, we we think of ourselves as individuals, as independent from each other. But if you were an extraterrestrial looking at the Earth a million miles away, and you saw these people running around with smartphones, and then you unpack the technologies involved in that smartphone and how thousands of individuals littered across the decades and centuries, their innovations and their inventions came together to make this one cell phone. It looks like hive consciousness from a million miles away. And so that's another thing to emphasize, because I believe our destiny as a species is to escape the gravity well womb of the Mother Earth and to expand. And, I'm I'm a fan of Gene Roddenberry. I'm a fan of the humanism that's embedded in Star Trek. And,
brother, I hear you.
Yeah. And America has a really important role to play in bringing the planet together.
That is as good a sum up as I can think of. What is next for Byron DeLear?
Well, this novel that I've been working on dutifully, Grand Union, I've got about 70,000 words in the can, and I need to. I'm right in the middle of the third act, so my mind is kind of centered around crossroads, because I have these 3 different groups of protagonists representing different societal components. You have a corporate group of protagonists, and you have a sort of a non-governmental organization group of protagonists, and then you have a religious fundamentalist military group of protagonists, and all their stories are collapsing right now. And so it's a daunting task to become a debut author. And
this is part of a trilogy.
It's part of a trilogy.
That's a huge endeavor.
It is. It's big. It's a big endeavor, and I haven't shared it with mainstream publishers yet. If I don't entertain, some sort of mainstream publishing deal, I'll probably self-publish and just take it from there. But if any of the audience would be interested in perhaps getting an update as to when the book will be available, I'd love to hear from you. And you can just email me at byrondellear@gmail.com or go to that author website that I just put up, byrondellear.com. On the clean energy front, my firm is expanding into a couple different regions. We'll probably be we've been working hard designing some clean energy programs in Arkansas and other areas of Missouri, and we applied for running the PACE program in Chicago, which is the Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is this innovative funding mechanism that allows property owners to do these energy efficiency retrofits, removing the barrier of upfront costs. And my partner Tom Applebaum and I have been working very hard at that. And he's an attorney and a geologist, and he's been a great friend in helping build energy equity funding. I want to give a shout out to another buddy of mine, an airline pilot for American Airlines named Jim Crossman. I grew up with him in Northern California, and
right on.
Jim's been getting snippets of my novel and encouraging me to write when I hit the writer's block every fortnight or so.
Well, let me say this. You know what? I don't think you should self-publish, because I read the synopsis that's on this page. I'm looking at the artwork. I think I'm relatively hip. I don't think you should self-publish. I think this is a commercial venture. I think this is something that a large publisher should put out.
Well, that's what I'm intending, because I believe in mainstream exposure, and
agreed.
The Revisiting the Flag at Prospect Hill, which is this nonfiction, very academically sound history of the Grand Union flag, and then some of the plausible connections with the East India Company. This acts as the backstory that underpins the novel, in the same way that Holy Blood, Holy Grail was the backstory for Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
So in the case of Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown wrote this book. It's sold 100 million copies or whatever. It's this huge movement. And he based his book on this nonfiction bit of fringe alternative history called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And so much so that the villain in Da Vinci Code is named Professor Lee Teabing. And that's an anagram. In other words, the letters are rearranged of the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
That's
But
right.
in my case, I've actually authored the backstory as well as the fiction. So
Yeah,
I guess I'll have to sue myself because the Holy Blood, Holy Grail guys wound up trying to sue Dan Brown for taking their work. And the judge said, well, you guys wrote this as a history book, right? And you can't copyright history. So Dan Brown got away with it.
And that gentleman, did he die under mysterious circumstances, or the man who wrote Holy Grail, or did he just pass away penniless? I vaguely remember he had a bit of a semi-tragic ending, I believe.
There are 3 authors on that book, and I can't recall the specifics of the circumstances there. Yeah. But
I do remember that they felt that he had taken some of the work. But yes, you cannot copyright history.
Right, you can't. So in that case, Dan Brown was off to the races, and I like the Da Vinci Code because it makes you think. Well. I mean,
yes.
And he got criticized by all sorts of literary critics because his prose sometimes is a little clunky and whatever. And I just view those folks as player haters. I mean, if you can reach 100 million people and get Tom Hanks to star in your movie, I mean, you've done something that has some impact.
Well, you and I had some correspondence a few months ago. We were talking about, and then I believe you also wrote a paper on it in the Examiner. We were talking about America Unearthed, Ancient Aliens, these types of shows that are on History Channel. And, we were talking about how some people were, they felt very negative towards those types of shows because they felt like, there was not enough scholarly attributions and worth there. But my take on that is, listen, if some of the material in those types of shows then inspire a young person to go forward and do the research on their own and come up with new and good ideas, it's worthwhile. And it serves a purpose.
Absolutely. There's a gentleman named Jason Colavito, who is he used to write for the Skeptic magazine, and he looks at ancient aliens and the show America Unearthed that's hosted by Scott Walter.
Yes.
And he basically calls their bluff on all of the pseudoscience that these shows are attempting to communicate as being legitimately academically sound perspectives. And Jason just brings a ton of archaeological research to the table and says, you guys are, full of it. Right. And so I've kind of struck up a correspondence with Jason Colavito, and I'm a fan of his prodigious, proliferate writing. He makes a blog entry every day on jasoncolavito.com. And another gentleman that I wanted to mention that perhaps will be on your show is a fellow brother Mason of mine named Joseph Wages, and he's an architect that lives in Texas.
Amazing.
And, he's done some amazing research in discovering the real primary sources on the Illuminati. And he has this book. Go ahead.
Well, I just found him on Facebook. So no, he absolutely has an invitation to come on the show because from what you've said, I'm on board. I would love to hear what he has
on modern day Illuminati or
This is the Bavarian Illuminati, the original Illuminati that was founded on May 1st, 1776.
Very cool.
And I think officially closed up shop in 1785 after being shut down by the aristocrats in Europe. But he has discovered all the real source code and primary source documents that have never seen the light of day before. And it's a fascinating cultural phenomenon because certainly, when you're talking about Jay-Z and Beyonce and being in the Illuminati and all this kind of stuff, it's amazing to see how these cultural memes proliferate out and develop their own currents and their own stories. Mm-hmm. And so as a student of human behavior, it's fascinating to discover the actual real source code on that. And
well, if he's listening, he is invited on the show, and I will reach out to him via Facebook because I would love to have him on the show. And it's funny because when you mentioned Jay-Z and Beyonce, I spoke about this same thing to Robert Sullivan. That's right. I believe those people are just it's just fashion sense. There's no credibility to their version of what we may be projecting upon them as so-called Illuminati.
Well, symbols have power. And,
that's true.
And, you know, the issue of semiotics, which goes beyond just geographic symbols or graphic symbols, and actually talks about how words become symbols in our minds that articulate ideas and meaning. I mean, this is really the DNA of how we get things done and how we develop things like smartphones and you know, send men to the moon, etc. So, you know, the symbols, unpacking the meanings of symbols, the overt meanings, and then the esoteric or hidden meanings has great value in understanding human psychology. And I'm a student of that kind of stuff, and I'm always fascinated by that.
Byron, you are a gentleman, a scholar, a really fascinating guy, and I hope that you'll come back on the show because I love listening to you speak. You know a lot about a lot of things, and you're just a great guy.
Well, thank you, and I've really appreciated your work, Michael, and I maybe we'll have the opportunity to put a couple documentaries together or something.
I would
in the future.
love that. I would love that.
There's a great cinematographer here in the St. Louis area, Dave Rutherford, who's a world-class cinematographer. He's worked on feature films, and we've got a whole production crew that's in the can ready to get to work. So all you got to do is send us the script, man.
There we go.
You guys, man, Byron, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Byron DeLear. His website is byrondelear.com. I'm looking at the clock. I know we got to get out of here. Joe Kiernan, thank you so much, brother. Episode 10 is in the can.